Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at Checking for Understanding by Douglas Fisher and Nancy Frey. And basically, it's all about formative assessment
Okay.
and, how can teachers use different methods during a lesson to really figure out what students are getting and then, adapt what they're doing to help those students. But I think, even if you're not a teacher, there's a lot here that can help anyone become a better learner themselves. So I'm excited to dive into this one with you.
Yeah, me too. This is one of my favorite books on assessment. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about it is it really stresses that regular checks for understanding are absolutely key
Yeah,
for effective teaching and learning.
makes sense.
And they use this great analogy, comparing teachers to coaches,
Okay.
right? So just like a coach would adjust their game plan based on what's happening on the field, teachers should adapt their teaching based on how students are doing in the moment.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's like we expect constant feedback in so many areas of life, but often forget about it when it comes to learning.
Right.
And the book really, drives home the idea that this feedback is about more than just like, did you do your homework or, did you memorize the facts? It's about uncovering those aha moments and guiding students towards a deeper level of understanding.
Exactly. And one way to do that is by addressing misconceptions.
Okay.
You might be surprised to learn that even the smartest students can have misconceptions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
For example, they might think that, larger objects are always heavier,
Uh-huh.
or fall into that gambler's fallacy, believing that, if you flip a coin and get heads 5 times in a row, tails is more likely to come up next.
Oh, wow. I've totally fallen for that coin flip one before.
Yeah.
It's so easy to like get tricked by those things.
It is, and it's a great example of how, you know, formative assessment isn't about like gotcha moments.
Yeah,
It's about helping students to learn and understand better.
totally. And, another book that gets mentioned is Understanding by Design by Wiggins and McTighe. What's that one about?
Yeah, so that book is all about what they call backward planning.
Okay.
So it encourages you to start with the desired outcome, meaning what you want students to understand,
Mm-hmm.
and then you design assessments to get them there. And now think about how this applies to your own learning. If you're trying to learn something new, do you have a clear picture of what success would even look like?
That's a good question. I know I often jump into something without even really defining like what success would even look like.
Yeah, it's a common mistake, but thinking about your desired outcome first can really transform your learning experience. Now, checking for understanding dives into several methods for formative assessment. But for this mock dive, we're going to focus on 3 that really stood out to me,
Okay.
which are oral language questioning and writing.
Okay, let's start with oral language. So I think a lot of people might think this just means having students answer questions out loud in class. But is it more than that?
It goes way beyond just like casual conversations
Okay.
and focuses on structured conversations where students are actually held accountable for their thinking.
Gotcha.
One example is accountable talk, which involves structured partner conversations where students need to use evidence and logic
Interesting.
to support their ideas.
So it's not just about sharing opinions, it's about teaching them how to have those like really productive, evidence-based discussions.
Right. They learn to explain their thinking, clearly provide evidence for their claims, and really engage with each other's ideas in a meaningful way.
I love that. It's like giving them the tools to have those really powerful back and forth discussions you see experts having in different fields.
Exactly.
Another technique they mention is retellings. Is that just like summarizing what they learned?
It's similar to summarizing,
Okay.
but it's about more than just repeating the facts. With retellings, students show they can identify the most important information,
Mm-hmm.
understand it, and then explain it in their own words.
So it's like a much deeper way to assess if they really understand something compared to just, memorizing and spitting back information.
Exactly. And it helps teachers to see, where students might be missing key details or where they're struggling to really connect the dots. And the book stresses the importance of teachers paying attention to students' nonverbal cues, too.
Oh, like their facial expressions and things like that.
Exactly. Sometimes those nonverbal cues can tell you so much about what a student is thinking, even if you can't quite put it into words yet.
Yeah, it's like teachers have this superpower of reading between the lines.
They do. They even talk about this technique called value lineups, where students literally stand on a spectrum to
Wow.
show their position on a certain topic.
That's so creative. I love that.
Yeah, it's a great way to quickly see where everyone stands and why they feel that way. And it encourages them to put their reasoning into words, which can help solidify their understanding.
For sure. Okay, so let's move on to our next method, questioning. Now, obviously, teachers ask questions all the time, but the book specifically critiques that traditional initiate, respond, evaluate model.
Right.
Where the teacher asks a question, the student answers, and the teacher says if it's right or wrong. What's wrong with that?
Well, they argue that it can sometimes limit student thinking to just trying to guess what's in the teacher's head.
Okay, so instead of really thinking deeply about the topic, they're just trying to figure out what the teacher wants to hear.
Exactly. And it's not just about the types of questions, but also about who gets to answer those questions.
Okay.
They suggest strategies like think, pair, share, where students discuss with a partner
Uh-huh.
before sharing with the whole class so that more students get a chance to contribute their ideas. They also bring up Bloom's taxonomy, which is a way to categorize questions based on the level of thinking they require.
Okay, I've heard of Bloom's taxonomy, but can you give me an example of how it works?
Sure. So imagine you're learning about listener's field.
Okay.
A low-level Bloom's question would be something like, what is the definition of key term?
Right? Pretty basic.
Right. But a high-level question might be, how would you apply key concept to solve problem relevant to the listener's field?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really makes you think beyond just the basic definition. I can see how using those higher level questions would push students to think more critically.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about asking more questions, but about asking the right questions to spark those deeper levels of understanding. And of course, giving effective feedback after students answer is also crucial.
Yeah, so instead of just saying right or wrong, the teacher should give feedback that helps the student understand why their answer was right or wrong and what they can learn from it.
Exactly. It's about turning those aha moments into real learning experiences. Okay, so now let's move on to our final method we're going to cover today,
Okay.
writing.
Writing, I feel like this is where students can really showcase their understanding in a more in-depth way than they can with just like a quick oral response.
You're absolutely right. Writing gives students a chance to organize their thoughts, develop their ideas, and demonstrate their understanding in a more nuanced way. And the book highlights several interesting techniques teachers can use to make writing a powerful tool for formative assessment.
Okay, let's hear about them. I'm ready for more of those aha moments.
All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so one that really stood out to me was interactive writing, where the teacher and the students kind of share the pen to co-create a piece of writing, and I love how that can reveal those learning gaps as they're happening.
Yeah, it's like watching the learning process unfold in real time. And it gives the teacher a chance to provide immediate feedback and support and guide those students towards a deeper understanding of, the writing process itself.
Another technique they talked about is RAF writing. What is that?
Okay, so RFT is an acronym. It stands for Role, Audience, Format, and Topic.
Gotcha.
So essentially it's a writing prompt, but it encourages students to think about the material from different angles.
So instead of just like writing a typical essay, they might take on the role of a historical figure, writing a letter, or even create a dialogue between like different characters.
Exactly. And because they have to consider the audience, the format, and the specific topic, it pushes them to demonstrate their understanding in a more creative and dynamic way.
I love that the book also emphasizes the importance of summary writing, which is something I think, we can all benefit from, not just students.
Oh, absolutely. Summarizing forces you to condense and synthesize information, which is such a valuable skill for anyone, no matter what you're learning.
Yeah, I always feel like I understand something better after I've tried to summarize it.
It's like taking this giant jigsaw puzzle and figuring out which pieces are essential to see the bigger picture. And speaking of bigger pictures, the book doesn't just focus on individual classrooms. It highlights the power of collaboration when it comes to assessment.
Collaboration between students, like group projects and things like that.
It involves students, but they also talk about collaboration between teachers.
Oh, okay, interesting.
They bring up the concept of common assessments, where teachers in the same grade or department all give their students the same test to see, patterns in student learning across different classes.
So instead of each teacher just seeing how their own students are doing, they get this broader view of, how students are understanding the material across the board.
Right, and this helps them to pinpoint areas where students might be struggling more broadly,
Uh-huh.
and then they can work together to, adjust their teaching or provide extra support in those areas.
That makes so much sense. It's like all the teachers working together to help all the students succeed. They also mentioned something called consensus scoring. What is that?
Yeah, so consensus scoring basically involves teachers getting together and they grade student work using a shared rubric.
Okay.
This helps ensure that everyone is grading consistently, and it provides an opportunity for teachers to learn from each other
Yeah.
and really calibrate their expectations.
That's a great idea. I think, sometimes grading can feel so subjective, so having that shared understanding could be really helpful.
Yeah, and it can be a great form of professional development, too. Instead of each teacher grading in their own little bubble,
Yeah.
they get to share their expertise and learn from each other's perspective.
I love that. It's all about creating a more collaborative and supportive environment. not just for students, but for teachers too.
Exactly. Now, so far we've talked a lot about different techniques for checking for understanding during lessons, but the book also explores how tests themselves can be used as valuable learning tools.
Really? So you're saying tests aren't just about, measuring what you've memorized.
Exactly. It's about moving beyond that traditional view of tests as just these high-stakes evaluations and embracing them as opportunities for growth and deeper understanding.
So it's not about getting rid of tests altogether, but about being more strategic about how we use them?
Precisely. For instance, they delve into the pros and cons of multiple choice tests,
Okay.
which often get a bad rap.
Yeah, I think people often see multiple choice questions as being more about test-taking tricks than actual knowledge.
That can certainly be true if the questions are poorly designed, but this book emphasizes that good multiple-choice questions should present meaningful problems and have answer choices that reveal common misconceptions that students might have.
So even if a student gets the answer wrong, it can give the teacher valuable information about how they're thinking and what they might be misunderstanding.
Exactly. It becomes a diagnostic tool, not just an evaluation.
I like that. And they also discuss other types of test questions, right? Like short answer questions.
Yes, short answer questions require students to generate their own responses, which can be really valuable for assessing their understanding.
Yeah, I like those because they allow students to show their thinking in a way that multiple choice questions sometimes can't. But I imagine they can be a lot more time consuming to grade.
That's true, but they offer some helpful tips for streamlining the grading process, such as using rubrics that clearly define the criteria for what constitutes a good answer.
Okay, that makes sense. And of course, no conversation about tests would be complete without talking about the essay question.
The essay, the one that strikes funny into the hearts of many students.
And probably some teachers too.
Yeah, but essays can be a really powerful way for students to demonstrate their ability to pull everything together, organize their thoughts and present a coherent argument.
Totally, but I've always wondered, with essays, how can teachers make sure they're grading them fairly and not letting their own personal biases influence their assessment?
It's a valid concern, and the book addresses this by emphasizing the importance of using clear prompts, developing rubrics with student input, and incorporating strategies to minimize bias during the grading process.
So even with something as potentially subjective as an essay, there are ways to make the assessment more objective and focused on understanding.
Absolutely, and it's not just about making things easier for teachers, it's about ensuring that students are being assessed fairly and that their grades accurately reflect their understanding of the material.
All this talk about tests and grading makes me think about another important point the book made, the importance of teachers checking their own understanding.
That's a crucial point that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
They really emphasize that effective teaching involves teachers regularly checking their own understanding of the content they're teaching, the learning standards they're working with, and the unique needs of their students.
I love that idea. It's about teachers being lifelong learners themselves, always striving to deepen their own understanding and improve their craft.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that teaching is a journey, not a destination. And the best teachers are the ones who are constantly reflecting, learning, and growing alongside their students.
That reminds me of something we talked about earlier, that, this whole approach to formative assessment isn't just for teachers and students. It's really for anyone who's passionate about learning and wants to be more effective at it.
I couldn't agree more. It's about moving beyond the fear and anxiety that often surround tests and embracing them as opportunities for growth and deeper understanding.
Well, I've learned so much from this conversation already. I'm already thinking about, how I can apply these ideas to my own learning and how I approach teaching others.
And remember, we've only just scratched the surface of what's covered in this book. There's a whole world of insights and practical strategies in there waiting to be explored.
Well, I know I'm definitely adding this book to my reading list. It sounds like an invaluable resource for anyone who wants to become a more effective learner or teacher.
I highly recommend it. It's a book that really stays with you.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been talking all about formative assessment. And, one of the things that has really struck me is how it can empower students to kind of, take ownership of their own learning.
Absolutely. Instead of just focusing on, getting the right answer,
Right.
students learn to think about why an answer is right or wrong
Yeah.
and what that tells them about their own thinking.
It's like, giving them the tools to become their own learning detectives.
Exactly. And, when students feel empowered to track their own progress and ask for help when they need it, learning becomes much more engaging and meaningful.
For sure. Another point that stood out to me was, how the book emphasizes that checking for understanding isn't just a one-time event. It's this ongoing process that's woven into, every aspect of teaching and learning.
It's about constant observation, questioning, and adjustment. Teachers are always looking for those clues about what students understand and what they're still grappling with.
Yeah, and it's not just about identifying what students don't know, it's also about celebrating what they do understand and acknowledging their progress.
That's so important for building confidence and motivation. When students feel like their efforts are being recognized, they're more likely to stay engaged and keep pushing themselves further.
Yeah, it creates that positive feedback loop where they feel encouraged to keep learning and growing. And what's really exciting is that this whole approach isn't limited to academic subjects. You can apply it to any type of learning.
Absolutely. Whether you're learning a new language, picking up a musical instrument, or developing a new skill, these principles of formative assessment can help you become a more effective learner.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into checking for understanding, what's the one key takeaway you hope listeners will, carry with them?
I think the most important thing to remember is that checking for understanding isn't just a teaching strategy, it's a mindset.
Oh, I like that.
It's about approaching learning with curiosity, a willingness to experiment, and a commitment to, ongoing reflection and growth.
That's beautifully said. And I think, Checking for Understanding by Fisher and Frey provides an incredible toolkit for anyone who wants to embrace this mindset. It's a book I know I'll be revisiting again and again.
Me too. It's one of those books that really stays with you. And for all of you listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Which techniques resonated most with you? How might you apply this approach to your own learning or teaching? Share your insights on our social media channels, and let's continue this fascinating conversation. Until next time, keep diving deep.